Support for this podcast and the following message comes from MGM Studios and United Artists Releasing's House of Gucci, directed by Ridley Scott and starring Lady Gaga, Adam Driver, Jared Leto, Jeremy Irons, with Salma Hayek and Al Pacino. Critics have hailed House of Gucci as one of the best films of the year, and that the cast displays a masterclass in acting with the best performances of the year. Nominated for 4 Critics' Choice Awards, including Best Supporting Actor Jared Leto and Best Actress Lady Gaga, winner of the New York Film Critics Circle for Best Actress, for your consideration in all categories, including Best Picture of the Year. Welcome, everybody, to Screen Talk. I'm Ann Thompson, editor-at-large at IndieWire, and I am delighted to welcome back to the podcast Eric Cohn, executive editor.
Hello.
Eric, you've been gone all this time.
But I was on the sidelines. I was listening in. You had some nice guests throughout to keep me oriented.
Eric, tell me a little bit about your experience with the movies during your paternity leave. I know you were playing with Ava and having fun, but how did you get out? Did you see anything? Are you up to date? Inquiring minds want to know.
So my daughter Eva was born on November 10th. And at that point in time, the first thing professionally I realized was that I would not be going to the screening of Licorice Pizza that week. And she was a pretty damn good excuse, obviously. But by that Tuesday, I realized that it was possible to sneak out for short durations of time sometimes and not feel totally irresponsible. So I did manage to kind of engage with the world in piecemeal. Obviously, I was following first reactions to things and so forth. But beyond that, all of the movies that you were talking about, from Licorice Pizza to Nightmare Alley and so on, I did manage to catch up on. So here's what I would say, though, big picture wise, is that you forget how much is squeezed into that fall corridor. And there was we kind of anticipated it before I left, but it was fascinating to see how, even though not every movie that came along completely changed the conversation, so much happened in November and December from a movie perspective, not just in terms of award season, but just in terms of conversations about the state of the market that we weren't having before then. So doesn't take long to really shake things up, and I'm sure that'll continue in the weeks ahead. So
Licorice Pizza was one that I ran out to see as well at a theater, and I went in with low expectations and was delightfully surprised by how much I loved it. It was unpretentious and really brilliantly executed, and of course cast with Alana Haim and Cooper Hoffman. What was your take?
Well, first of all, I want to know why you were surprised that you liked it. It's PTA. Does he make bad movies?
PTA and I go in and out. PTA can be brilliant and extraordinary, obviously. And then there are times, something like Inherent Vice. I wasn't sure if this was going to be quirky, weird, impenetrable PTA, or whether it was going to be. I regard this as probably his most accessible movie.
100%. I mean, it's his most lighthearted movie.
Yeah.
Even if you go back and look at what is the smallest scale he's ever worked on, something like Heart 8. Well, that's a dark movie. I mean, there's something about this one that it's just sort of like embracing the opportunity to play and do something that's heartwarming through his own lens, obviously. But what I liked about it is that it's so vignette based that it never really requires you to feel like you have to sort of unravel what it's up to. You can just kind of live in the moment with these characters.
Yep, absolutely right.
On some, there are some parts of the movie that I found a bit disposable, sometimes a little gimmicky with some of the cameos, but there are some sequences that are some of his best directed. Specifically, I think about that the Bradley Cooper sequence, the truck rolling down the hill. Some of his best filmmaking ever.
And also the Sean Penn sequence was pretty brilliant as well.
Oh, sure. Playing this William Holden character, very imbued with,
that whole scene on the golf course. Yeah. And I just love the way that he keeps setting up these situations where the two actors, the two leads, are running toward each other, and when I spoke to Alana Haim, she rejected the idea that it was also that whole story of how PTA, shot the video cameos for the Himes, and then created a role for her, and
that's great.
And how
casting.
she was brought
She's
in.
amazing.
It's just wonderful. But she was delightful too to get to talk to. But she basically said that it was not a romance, and that she and Cooper Hoffman were magnetically drawn to one another, and that's why I love those scenes of them running toward each other, to save each other. It's remarkable what he did filmically. I do think.
Well, I also think culturally, I mean, there are moments where filmmakers, I think, take a risk on material and don't realize that they're alienating their audience in the process. But what I found fascinating is that in a very sensitive environment like today, this is a filmmaker who seems to be very confident in the decisions he makes. I thought about this with Phantom Thread, which came out after, when Me Too, the reckoning of Me Too was so fresh. The idea of, the way he treated her. I remember watching that movie and being like, are people going to get really mad about the way that this sort of dynamic unfolds? And they didn't, because it was so complex and thought through. And I felt similarly with the relationship in this movie, even if there was some stupid Twitter discourse about, a teenager and a woman in her 20s having a relationship.
Obviously reverse the sexes, yeah. And,
but also, come on, like there's no real sexuality in this movie at all. I mean,
I think she shows her breasts to him.
Yeah.
As I recall.
It's such
and he reaches out moment. And grabs her and gets slapped for it, right?
Yeah, but I mean, those are comical moments. I mean, if you want to pick one detail apart, it would be obviously this racist character who imitates a Japanese accent, and
some people are very upset about that.
I think that bit doesn't quite work well enough, but it's not something that derailed the movie for me as a whole.
No.
It's a very minor part of it. But yeah,
so it's in the race. It's in the Best Picture race. I'm not sure how well it will do with the actors, but because the Best Actress race is so competitive. But I think PTA might win original screenplay at last. And
should be fascinating. Because it's a movie it's not a traditional screenplay really in this,
but it is brilliantly.
Yeah,
it just that's how it feels just looking at the sort of bellwether awards so far. It could change, but I think that could happen. I think he'll get nominated for Best Director too, and Picture.
One of those guys he doesn't do much. He doesn't like to campaign.
No.
So I remember with Phantom Thread, he didn't do that. I was chair of New York Film Critics Circle. He didn't come to that. He went on vacation with his family, but still got all these nominations. So we'll see if that happens. With Licorice Pizza, it's not as big a contender in the same way. Does it get a Best Picture? That's an interesting.
Yeah, it will, because there are 10.
And it's done decent in terms of audience. I mean, even in this fraught
box
market,
office. We've been talking about this in your absence. I mean, the whole question of what impact the box office. I'm beginning to look at box office as I think West Side Story definitely got hurt because it was exclusive at the box office, and King Richard. Everyone knew that it was actually playing well at home. It wasn't a question of whether people saw it or not. It was available day and date. Dune was available day and date and still did really well in theaters. So it's the theater-only movies that are getting hurt by not being seen. That's the issue. Yeah. They're not being seen, and they don't get the plus of a box office hit attached to them, the buzz, the discussion, the word of mouth. I mean, Don't Look Up, I'm jumping around, but Don't Look Up is a movie that got such a huge conversation going because it was on Netflix.
That was an easy win for Netflix.
It was the holiday conversation piece.
And you gotta love how Adam McKay just went for it. It was like, we're just gonna say, if you don't like this movie, you don't support discussion about climate change. Sure, whatever. Let the Twitter mobs go crazy over that one, and keeps you in the public eye. I really enjoyed Don't Look Up. I have to say, it is obviously overlong in ways that are kind of undeniable.
I didn't mind that at all.
And
I loved it.
It is taking some wild swings, but here's a couple of things I enjoyed about it. where yes, it's imbued with meaning, but it's satire that works on a couple of different levels. It's not just about climate change. It's also about the media's inability to reckon with serious problems.
I think that's what it's really about.
Yeah. So being able to do those two things at the same time, and also being cognizant of the fact, I will say, as a space nut, that being hit by an asteroid is a real threat to humanity. We have this thing called the NEO Surveyor that's supposed to launch to help track these things. And I listened to a great podcast in which the science advisor to the movie was talking about how they advised McKay to find a real threat. And this can really happen. So it really does work on several different layers, even as it's also this very ridiculous movie that's eager to entertain. And so
one of the things I appreciate about it, and this isn't something most people are talking about, is that Leonardo DiCaprio is a real movie star, right? He's in that position that people like Cary Grant were in, at the height of their careers. And he lasted a long time, Cary Grant, at the top of the Hollywood pyramid. And he had his choice. He had his pick of the best movies, the best directors. Leo's in that position, and Leo turns things down. He did not do Nightmare Alley. Why didn't he do Nightmare Alley? I think he perceived that character played by Bradley Cooper, and I don't want to say that Bradley Cooper did a bad job. If you're playing that character, if you're playing in this dark noir universe with a venal character, you aren't going to make people love you. You're not gonna pull the audience in, and Leo understood that. He's willing to play villains. He's willing to be entertaining as a villain.
We don't have a lot of movie stars with us anymore, but if you think about, I remember thinking about this with Tom Hanks when he was playing Mr. Rogers in Won't You Be My Neighbor, and
he's more in the Jimmy Stewart vein.
But it's the same thing. It's like, name a movie where that guy's played a contemptible character.
Jimmy Stewart did do it later in his career post World War II. He actually became the darker version of himself, which is a fascinating thing Scorsese has talked about. But the thing about Leo, he is willing to be dark. He was in Django Unchained. That's not the issue. He wants to be in a hit. He wants to be in a movie that does well. And he understood that Nightmare Alley was not going to be a crowd pleaser. And he did. And Don't Look Up is a clever movie because he gets to play this geeky guy. It's probably the first time that he's really embracing being an older guy, for one thing, who's got a wife and who goes with a woman of a certain age, even if Cate Blanchett is alluring.
Sons.
Yes, she is in his age range. He embraced his real age in this movie, but he became sexy when he was having the affair with Cate Blanchett, and he cleaned up and fixed his beard and his haircut and everything.
This is the
so he becomes a fantasy figure for regular guys.
But this is also a thing that happens as well, which is that once you turn the camera, look, Chris Cuomo went down while I was out too. Like, once you turn the camera on people, the concept of responsibility to the truth becomes secondary to
building the brand and getting the attention. And watching him go through that was fascinating because he became a victim of social media and attention and getting response, which we can all relate to.
He was good, but how is this movie good? Because I saw this one in the privacy of my own home and enjoyed it.
It plays well in a theater.
I'm curious about how it's played around and also how it's playing with the Academy, which doesn't usually reward comedies of any sort.
The thing about Don't Look Up is that it ticks a couple boxes because it does have the gravitas to play to the liberal side of the Academy. It's a soft lob down the middle to Academy members. And they don't treat Adam McKay as a comedian. They treat him as a serious filmmaker. They've given him nominations already for his previous films. Yeah. And he got a screenplay win. Yeah.
I did find
for The Big Short.
That
and Vice. They liked Vice too.
I wouldn't say I enjoyed, but I was fascinated by the conversation around McKay's falling out with Will Ferrell that came out of some reporting.
Yeah, he did some soul searching there.
Yeah, it is, but it is really interesting because it is true that the kind of more broad comedies do not garner you the same ability to reach.
This isn't a broad comedy, you see. So I don't put it in the category
that's the
of
point
the kind
that I'm
of
making.
Comedy the Academy ignores. I put it in the category of a comedy that is about something.
That's what I'm saying. Is that I think the takeaway I got from that was that this was somebody who realized years ago that he had to evolve beyond those in order to have an impact with this other contingency. And the Farrell comedies obviously don't fit that mold.
I think it'll make it to Best Picture and screenplay. Wow. And I think I don't know. Leo's on the cusp of getting into the Best Actor race. He isn't campaigning that much, so we'll have to see.
He's got one.
If he wants to pursue it or not. The other thing is that people make a big fuss about these film Twitter conversations that occur. And it is, I must remind everyone that film Twitter is a very small demo, a very tiny sliver of the world.
Well, there are, more influential, higher level people, let's say industry people who are having conversations about things or putting things out there that generate news. And then there are I don't want to say anonymous cinephiles, but lower profile cinephiles who are sort of engaging with their own specific communities. Some of them are quite young and have their own specific networks that they're engaging with. And then there's journalists and critics, and those people can have an influence that trickles down. So it isn't just one thing. And I think different people have different perceptions based on who they're following, what they think is gaining traction. So I don't think it's so clearly defined.
Well, it's fair to say that Don't Look Up took off on film Twitter across the board, and that debate
and they leaned
was
into
raging, and they helped it rage.
Yeah,
they did.
And
by the way, Netflix knows exactly what they're doing. They recognize that conversation is a good conversation. It makes people, it drives. I had many examples of people on my Twitter feed who, and my Twitter feed is mostly film Twitter, is they basically were driven to see the movie because of the debate about the movie. And over the holiday, everybody caught up with it.
My Twitter feed is like film Twitter mixed in with like space and science Twitter, and space and science Twitter was like universally positive on this movie.
Cool.
So that was one thing. It's like the people were seeing how their challenges of saying serious things about threats to humanity were not translating in the media. They were seeing that in the movie. And then there was this whole conversation about, is it actually a good movie? And like, is Adam McKay a jerk for taking people to task and all that stuff? That just feels very ephemeral to me, which is why it's easy to just mess with it from a marketing standpoint.
Well, then there's some political Twitter, the kind of people that got into this argument about whether you have to agree with the movie to like the movie, which is absurd. I think you can judge a movie without judging its message, and you can see whether it works or not. So I would say the other movie that you might have had to catch up with was House of Gucci.
Yeah, not a huge fan of that one, I have to say. I mean, I thought that it was very confused tonally, that there were moments where it was trying to be camp and other moments where it was accidentally camp. And I wasn't deeply invested in the kind of narrative arc of this business or Driver's character. I found Lady Gaga's performance quite distracting with the fake accent and all that kind of stuff. There were moments that I found entertaining, but overall, it was a big whiff to me. It certainly wasn't the best Ridley Scott movie of the year, that's for sure.
No, I agree with you actually 100% on this one. I think all the actors were in different rooms. Like I didn't feel like Ridley Scott was orchestrating it, which Lady Gaga, I interviewed her and she argued that he was orchestrating it. I don't think he was. I think they were all doing whatever the hell they wanted. And I loved the beginning of the movie. When I first entered the movie and followed the romance and was introduced to her character as a young woman and the romance with the young Gucci played by Adam Driver, I was into it. And then it became more as they paid more attention to the other Guccis, including the broad performance by Al Pacino, Jeremy Irons, and Jared Leto, off the charts. They completely lost me. But the benefit, and Adam Driver was in his own universe too. When I saw it at the Academy Museum, though, at a screening with a lot of actors, I understood perfectly that Jared Leto and Lady Gaga would get nominated. We shall see what happens at SAG. SAG will be, Golden Globes are going to announce on the 9th of January. We don't know exactly how they're going to do it, whether it's a press conference or some kind of event that they stage to announce it. But or if they just do it on Zoom or something. But it will have a little ripple. It was basically ignored mostly by the media in terms of its impact. The Critics' Choice were poised to be more impactful, but they had to cancel because they were a live event. So the Golden Globes, in a weird way, dodged a big bullet. Not having
I will say though, on
this year,
the social media front, House of Gucci, it's almost like it's more meme than movie. It felt like it was ripe for a moment because there were so many things like that whole father, son, and House of Gucci line and stuff like that
which
were
she made up.
Yeah, the internet went crazy with stuff like that, and I feel like
her support is huge. Let's be honest about this. Lady Gaga is a movie star, and I watch what she's doing to campaign for herself with awe. This woman, she's on a Madonna level. I mean, she's extraordinarily good at getting out there. Yeah. And her interview with me, she played me perfectly. And
I was in the room when she won New York Film Critics Circle. You could feel the divide. That was another thing I managed to do. I got out of the house to vote.
Oh, you got to go to that.
I got to go to the room for that, which was, I don't know if people would do that now.
Right. Well, that's a whole other
pre-Omicron world. But that's a whole other question. When she won, I was sort of like, all right, sure, whatever, folks. Hopefully the dinner happens and she shows up and that'll be entertaining. But I was pushing for something else to happen there. I was
surprised by that vote, frankly, but it shows how much support she actually has.
Critics are excited by movie star performances, and that's what I think people felt like they saw there. So.
Well, the question there is whether House of Gucci has any support in any other categories, and I'll argue it will get those too. It'll just get those acting nominations. I'm not sure it even gets into the Best Picture race because I think a lot of people recognize that it's kind of a mess. But a lot of people liked it and enjoyed it as a piece of entertainment, which is fine. Nightmare Alley. So that's one that I was disappointed in too. I ended up humming the sets. I ended up recognizing how beautiful it was. I mean, no one can match Guillermo del Toro's artistry in terms of creating this world. But what did you think?
I actually quite liked it. I found it uneven in parts. Specifically later when the Cate Blanchett character is introduced, I thought the plot got a little bit too murky and it felt a bit cold to me. But in terms of a movie that was sort of attuned to the appeal of film noir and the specific dark nature of this character that Bradley Cooper plays, who sort of in a weird way makes peace with his sort of fate in life, I found quite engrossing all the way to the end with that last shot. I revisited the 1947 version, and I think the ending alone is what makes this movie improve on the previous adaptation, in that it is so clear-eyed about the bleak nature of the material, and that this character is essentially irredeemable. But also there's something really beautiful about him coming to terms with that. And in that sense, I think it's some of the most striking and intimate filmmaking Guillermo has done, even if it's not, as rewarding as all these wonderful fantasies that he's made as a whole. But I did enjoy watching it quite a bit.
I found that there was a difference between the Bradley, this may be part of what you're saying, the Bradley Cooper character and the way that Tyrone Power played him. In the first one, you did root for that character to find redemption. And in this one, you knew from the beginning that there was no possible redemption for him. Yeah. Well, but he was always going to go to the dark side, always.
Yeah, and I appreciated that about that. I think there's something sort of uncompromising. I would love to see the black and white version of this movie that's coming out or getting some sort of limited screenings, because I also thought that just visually it was very attuned to the language of noir in some really remarkable ways, although
it was gorgeous.
It's not my favorite, but
now the Academy will come around. I mean, I think it'll be a Best Picture contender, and the people will give it some crafts, but I don't think it will get that far. I don't even think they'll get the screenplay nomination for that one. And I don't think they'll get any acting either. I don't. Because those categories are very competitive.
Yeah, an actor in particular, it sounds like, would be a tough one for him to break into.
So West Side Story, did you go out to see that in a theater?
Oh, yeah. I couldn't. I actually. So there was one week, and we talked about it at home quite a bit, but pulled it off where I went to the Gothams one night and then West Side Story the next morning. So the big West Side Story premiere was in Lincoln's Air at the same time as the Gothams, but I was able to do both of those things. So that was a packed week. But West Side Story, I was very glad to see when I saw, because it felt like being part of the initial awareness for this movie was really rewarding, and finding out that it was a very satisfying big screen musical. Lo and behold, Spielberg, who's never made a musical in his, nearly 50 years of being a filmmaker, did his homework and did a really good job. I would say that the challenges I had with this movie are that it is so reverential of its source material that it has some of the same issues, in the sense that I don't think the last third of the movie is as satisfying. And I wasn't blown away by the performances as a whole, but the real stars, the camera, the choreography, the way this movie moves.
The music is the real star.
Yeah. Well, that's the foundation.
Which is what he's serving.
He's
serving it.
And the concept of gentrification baked into the plot.
I like that.
Masterstroke.
That was Kushner's brilliant move.
Yeah, it's West Side Story, but I found it to be a very satisfying modernization of it that was still very much tethered to its roots.
So one of the things I'm learning as I talk to Academy members over the holidays is that there really is resistance to West Side Story being remade at all. That is a real theme that I'm hearing, is why did they have to remake it? Why did Steven Spielberg have to remake it? Why? Because they love the original so much. I was open to it and I loved it, and I thought he did a great job and improved on it in many ways. I do not regard the original as some kind of classic. This one is better, and it enriches the characters and deepens there's an old Hollywood lingo that I've always enjoyed called it deepens the chroma. The idea is that it takes those characters and makes them richer and gives them a broader, more meaningful context. Anyway.
You know what the fundamental flaw of that remake argument is? Nobody ever brings it up with theater. I saw West Side's Rudin-produced production of West Side Story on Broadway, like in 2019.
I know, Shakespeare can be done, Macbeth can be done. So basically, West Side Story has a part of the explanation for why it didn't do better in theaters is that older people didn't go; they were afraid of the virus. But there seems to have been some resistance also to the idea of it being remade. I agree with you completely. I think it's silly. Why can't they remake it?
And of all the things that could be remade today, I mean, the concept of remakes is annoying, and I wouldn't mind somebody saying, I'm going to do a modernization of West Side Story and set it in the future and make it steampunk and also change the name, and then it'll be an homage and something new and fresh, and I like that idea. But of all things you're going to get mad about, Steven Spielberg making a great movie in 2021 is not really one that I would get bogged down by. So it's too bad that movie wasn't a big success commercially, in spite of all that stuff. I guess it's not surprising in retrospect, but I hope that it continues to, get out there and get talked about. I mean, I still think Flea should be the front runner for Best Picture.
Of
but
course
if we're going to give it to something else, and I also thought T-Tain should have been on the damn short list. There's a lot of stuff we could go through in terms of the sins of the season.
The last movie of the season is one that you saw, and for various weird reasons, I did not. Spider-Man.
Future Best Picture winner, Spider-Man.
I obviously was resisting seeing Spider-Man, and I have to admit that I've seen too many Spider-Men. I've seen them all. I have seen them all.
This movie is actually about that in a weird sort of way. The movie is a crowd pleaser, as you might imagine, for people who are invested in the crowd-pleasing potential of Marvel movies, because it is explicitly about continuing to fix the challenges of making the MCU work. And Spider-Man was its biggest challenge because he was part of Sony. And this movie, by working in the Sony versions of Spider-Man that didn't work that well, allows those actors that were in those movies to kind of make peace with that. And it also is more explicitly about the character of Spider-Man finally kind of growing up and coming to terms with who he really is, which sets him up to be a bigger part of the MCU going forward. So it does a lot of stuff. I don't want to spoil a lot of it, but the way in which
I'll catch up with it. I mean, I am an MCU fan. I'm a Marvel fan. It's just that Spider-Man is just like, no, that makes it sound more interesting.
I didn't love all of it.
So explain why it's such a huge hit.
We know that Kevin Feige is one of the great, movie geniuses of the 21st century in terms of what he created here. This is a movie that is predicated on the appeal of earlier movies. And Spider-Man has always been a fun character to root for because he's got this sort of playful, self-effacing quality to him that, a lot of people can relate to. Certainly a lot of male viewers can relate to. In interrogating that in a way that I think will resonate with people, especially audiences that might have grown up on Marvel movies and feel like they're on a similar timeline to a character like that. So I think there's a lot going on there. It's also got Doctor Strange in it, and it is setting up the next Doctor Strange film in certain kinds of ways. The post-credit sequence is actually more like a trailer.
Obviously, in terms of the industry, Spider-Man literally saved the box office for last year. And there was a period of time where it was eating up like 70% of the box office,
Super spreader.
And all these other movies were just trailing, and all these art house releases were doing nothing, just doing pitiful. I think if I have this right, Neon took Memoria out and put it in theaters just for 1 week in each city, and which makes sense to me.
They made a very fun, or at least sort of bold announcement about that a while ago, that it would only play one city at a time, for never be available anywhere else ever. Now, obviously, it is available in other parts of the world as a DVD and so forth, but
it will be available soon, quickly online, which is the new model.
Along with Titane, should have been on the short list, but I'm not surprised. It's a very challenging film.
I heard people, complain about how long and slow it actually was. But I thought they did a good job with the short list of 15 movies. I understood that Titane was going to be a calculated risk. I think Terry bet on it as the Cannes entry, the Palme d'Or winner, and I think they should have gone with the one about abortion. I really do.
Happening.
Yeah.
IFC picked up and is now going to reintroduce.
It's very good.
Festival circuit, but it is worth pointing out that Cannes had, I believe it was 8 films on the short list.
They did very well.
They did very well. Even so.
From A Hero to A Hero is and Flea. Yeah.
Yeah. So it worked out.
Now Flea is going to end up on the, I think, in the top 5 for international as well as documentary. And it could be contending with Summer of Soul for best documentary, and The Rescue. The Rescue's in there too. People love that movie.
Rescue, I assume, also is benefiting from being on Disney Plus.
Yes, it's about what people have seen and how it plays. And The Rescue, once it gets nominated, even though they won before, which usually is a deterrent to something winning again, the larger Academy could respond very well to The Rescue.
It plays well. It's tense and it's memorable and it's heartwarming and all that kind of stuff. But Summer of Soul is just such a remarkable
It'll happen.
Achievement.
Yeah.
And Flea is amazing. I mean, I would love to see like I said, I mean, I did a story about this that ran while I was out, but to have Flea and Summer of Soul as movies that play so well and could potentially be cracking other categories is very exciting. Why should we rule out Best Picture? There's no real reason why those aren't Best Picture movies.
Here's what I would argue for. I would argue for the documentary category to have 10 nominations, as well as the
one argument that some people are putting forward. Or there are other people who said we should have other documentary categories, maybe a documentary editing category, something like that would open up docs just to be seen more and it's celebrated more widely, and that could push them up. I don't see that happening.
Long as the Academy is so worried about their ratings on ABC, and as long as ABC is putting as much pressure on them as they are, none of these things will happen because they will only make the actual broadcast longer. And the whole question of the Oscars and how many people are actually going to be interested in these movies this year is still a big one. So there's been this big push, a lobbying campaign. It feels like it's on the part of the trades. And here's the thing. You and I work for IndieWire. People like Clayton Davis at Variety and Pete Hammond at Deadline and Steve Pond at The Wrap. Scott Feinberg at The Hollywood Reporter. All and me, obviously, we're all invested in the success of the Oscars and in advertising that supports our revenues. It's what we live on. But it's an ecosystem. I see this ecosystem as being very much in danger. And I would say that's part of the reason why somebody would argue for Spider-Man, lobby for Spider-Man to be part of the Oscar conversation. And usually Spider-Man would be part of the conversation for some possible tech categories. Do you think that Spider-Man should be part of the Oscar conversation? I don't. The only reason they're doing it is because they want the telecast to be successful.
Aesthetically, I don't really think so. And I think it would actually, in a strange way, devalue the Oscars to push for movies that aren't necessarily worthy of it just to improve ratings. There must be another kind of solution to this. I don't know what it is. It's not my job to figure that out.
The solution is to make the theaters successful again.
Well, there's that.
You need the movies to be in the conversation.
You
need them to be part of the office.
But the telecast itself needs more stuff. I did like how
the water cooler conversation.
Kyle Buchanan made a suggestion that they don't totally understand the whole social mediaization of everything.
They don't market properly.
That could be something improved. One thing that occurred to me, this is really ambitious, but the best thing that Steven Soderbergh did in his not very good Oscars, I thought, was the pitch that what if the Oscars were a movie? And he didn't deliver on that. And I
felt the opening.
Something could have happened.
The opening was awesome.
If you had a scripted special of some sort that you were watching and the award season was somehow folded into that, I don't expect this year's producers to do that. But there's something about the idea of the award shows themselves are just not really exciting TV. You have to create some other reason for people to watch this thing if ratings are going to be a key aspect.
No, but it's a fascinating thing to see that the ecosystem itself, because of the pandemic, because of what's happened with the Golden Globes, a whole lot of different reasons, all the buzz isn't happening. And the theaters, I do believe very strongly that if the theater going experience declines and diminishes the way I think it's going to in the next few years, that the ability for movies to build that kind of awareness across the country on a national level and have people rooting and have interest in these movies will be diminished, and it will go away, and the Oscars will therefore not be what they were ever again.
Well, then make Best Picture worthy movies that work on a large scale, like Black Panther, which got a Best Picture nomination. I don't think that it's impossible for these movies to crack. They just have to be made in a way that actually is justifiable. I don't think Spider-Man, which is very much a commercial product designed to celebrate its own,
of course,
is a Best Picture movie. So
nor is The Matrix.
No, but it did remind me that we're probably living in a simulation with all this bullshit.
No, Matrix 4 is fascinating in the way that it's meta. There was this moment where I was watching it where I was thinking, God, this is really old-fashioned in this weird way. It's like doing exactly what it did back in the day. Yeah. And literally, as I'm thinking this, the dialogue reflects it and says it. Yeah. And I was okay. They're on to what they're doing and not doing.
But certainly that first heavily meta act where you have, Keanu playing Neo as somebody who designed the first 3 games and that explicitly saying that Warner Brothers is trying to reboot it and all that kind of stuff. That's just like a brilliant calculation on the part of Lana Wachowski, because only she could have done that. And we know that, like, for example, Zach Penn wanted to do this Morpheus origin story and stuff. It's like, it's such a uncompromising approach to a commercial product. And I love that kind of subversion. I think once the mythology of the Matrix gets into it, you're reminded of why Matrix 2 and 3 weren't as good.
Well, they always end up with these ridiculous scale situations with too many things going on in a digital universe that no one could possibly believe in.
And I was not, I mean, he was funny, but I didn't think Neil Patrick Harris's character really.
No, but I have to say, I always did love Keanu Reeves in this role. And there's this wonderful interview on Esquire video with him that I just ate up. He's delightful, Keanu Reeves, and I thought he carried this perfectly well. It's a lightweight thing. It really is.
You root for this guy to continue to be as appealing on screen. I mean, we were talking about like what is a real movie star. He's like his own version of a movie star. He
Absolutely.
invented his own category.
The other interview that you and I both listened to over the holidays, which I highly recommend, is the one that Bill Simmons did with Ben Affleck for the movie The Tender Bar.
Which I haven't seen.
Which is I've seen, and you don't have to see it.
My one blind spot.
You can skip it. But no, Affleck is very good in it. He plays a supporting part that's tailor-made for him, and he runs with it, and he's fine. But the Bill Simmons he's a very good interviewer. I've always admired him as an interviewer, and he has this sort of good old boy rapport with a lot of the guys that he interviews. And when they can talk about sports together, that just builds an enormous bond. And so it is really fun to listen to Ben Affleck talk about the Boston Red Sox and his friendships with football stars. Exactly.
So that was a good conversation, and he also unlocked Affleck's the sort of what Affleck has been trying to do the last few years with things that people thought didn't quite work. Like, why did he choose to play Batman? Well, he felt like if he wants to prove himself to people, then he should do one of those things that all these people are sort of paying attention to now. It's very calculated.
That was one of those eye blink moments where I remember so powerfully reacting to his decision to play that role really negatively. Like, that was a mistake.
Yeah, I read a lot of people.
And I knew. I have always felt a great deal of sympathy for him in terms of the way that the media has treated him and his attempts to protect his own family. I felt for him in that part of the interview.
Yeah, and the thing is that, I mean, again, I haven't seen Tender Bar, but I have plenty of respect for Ben Affleck as a creative, and I have seen all the movies he's directed, and I think he's a good filmmaker, and that part of it is a key part of the equation too. I mean, that he won an Oscar as a screenwriter early in his career. You know, like it's not just about being on camera; it's about making creative choices that are about the entire outcome, and that's a kind of calculation that I think should not be taken lightly, because a lot of actors are not that careful about what they do.
In the year of Argo, I got to talk to him, and I also remember watching a tribute that I think it was Leonard Maltin did with him, and he at the Santa Barbara Film Festival, he was really open and flowing and not, protecting himself that much. And I got a real picture of him as a writer and a director and an actor and a producer, and someone who really is very smart. I have always believed that Ben Affleck could run a studio. He could do that.
Hey, maybe you're giving him some ideas here. I wouldn't be opposed.
The trouble with acting is it's easier, and it's you're able to be to be paid. The trouble with writing and directing is that it's hard and it takes a long time. And I keep seeing him sliding back into the acting mode when I wish he would direct. That's what he does the best.
Yeah. Well, memo to Ben. It's not too late. This is a nice special opportunity to reconnect with you, Anne. I feel like my brain's been popping around having, private monologues that should involve you. I've been sort
Here's
of.
What I'm going to say to you, Eric.
I'm
going to say that you up my tennis game.
Well, welcome back. Okay. I can't wait to the weird year we have ahead of us, but let's get into it, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.